When New World Aeternum was announced during June's Summer Game Fest, much of the emphasis was placed on the MMO's console launch. Yet when Aeternum hits digital shelves on October 15th, it will also come with a plethora of endgame activities that max-level PC players can jump right into. From the new 10-player raid, repeatable daily soul trials, and the new open-world PvP zone, there's plenty to do for PC players who are eager for new content. During an event at Amazon Games Orange County's Irvine studio, I had the chance to go hands-on with all three of these new endgame modes to see what they offer to players who've already reached that max level of 65. And while the open beta left me with questions about what PC players will have to look forward to come October 15th, this preview answered quite a few of them pretty definitively. First up was the new PvP zone, the Cursed Mists. This is a new region tacked onto the existing Cutlass Keys in the southwest of Aeternum, and it offers the first forced PvP zone in New World since its 2021 launch. A mix of PvP and PvE, Cutlass Keys is now a max level zone, but it still offers much of what you'd expect a PvE zone to offer players. There's a settlement, a fort to conquer, and shrines to port around when you're collecting resources and just simply completing quests. In this PvE region, PvP isn't forced. You'll still need to flag yourself, and factional lines are still very much honored. However, crossing into the Cursed Mists, all bets are off. This is a pure, free-for-all zone where it's literally every player for themselves. There's no grouping, faction no longer matters, and there's no way to toggle PvP on or off. It's a scrum, and the longer you explore the zone, the more dangerous it becomes. There are multiple new points of interest to explore and loot for those precious new doubloons, which is a new endgame currency that can be used to spend on gear and other items at the new crafting station in Cutlass Keys' settlement. The lightning fields is exactly what the name implies, while Pierre Bridge turned into a bloody crossing for those of us in the test. The Cursed Mist forced players to contend with the new PvP VE arena, where players can be ambushed by other players, and that fight could be ambushed by local monsters that prowl the zone, creating some spectacular chaos when it all comes together. Fights in the new free-for-all zone quickly turn into large-scale brawls given enough players around. While some of our one-on-one duels were honored, opportunism always found a way to strike, whether it be the musketeer sending a volley at a low-health enemy to steal a kill, or a melee player sensing weakness and forming impromptu packs to kill the lowest health character in the area. It's chaotic fun, and I can only imagine how it's going to look with a full server come October 15th. The Cursed Mist will still feature plentiful endgame resources to harvest, but these resources will be cursed. To cleanse them, you simply need to leave the free-for-all area without dying with them in your inventory. Get killed by a player though, and you'll drop half your cursed loots and doubloons for other players to gather and escape with. It's a nice nod to the full loot beta test that many remember in the early days of New World's development. And it gives a great feeling of risk-reward to even a PvP-averse player like myself. It's a winner-take-all game in the Cursed Mist, and it should help scratch that large-scale PvP itch that some new players have wanted for a while now. One of the main talking points from Amazon about the New World Aeternum launch was just how soloable the new version would be. Many MMOs nowadays are ensuring solo play is just as viable as group content, and New World Aeternum is no different. Enter Soul Trials. During the main story quest, players would at times be required to hop into an expedition, New World's version of instanced dungeons, to move the story forward. Those expeditions are still there, but if you're someone who plays solo, this isn't an ideal way to play the MMO. We've seen soul trials in the MMO before, where combat meets narrative, but now those trials will finally be repeatable with daily soul trials. This is a rotation of soul trials you can tackle to earn endgame rewards such as weapons, armor, and more. This is endgame content, meaning you'll need to be level 65 to tackle them when they come with the launch. 3 soul trials were available for us to test: Beyond the Gates to take on the corrupted Leviathan boss, the Last Soul Warden, which sees you take on a familiar face, and the Tempest Mind, which features the Isabella fight. These ramped up in difficulty as I moved through them, and each feels like a snapshot of the story quest that it accompanies quite well. While the corrupted Leviathan fight and the Last Soul Warden's fight felt pretty familiar and were relatively painless to overcome, the Isabella fight was rough. Out of the 7 journalists at the event, only one of us actually overcame Isabella's might. Spoiler alert, it wasn't me. These trials look to be quick ways to jump into New World at level cap, take on a boss, and earn some cool loot if you can overcome them. It's cool to see that these are finally repeatable, and I'm curious as to what the release cadence for the new Soul Trials will be post Aeternum's launch, as there are only so many currently in the MMO right now. If the team can't keep these updated as part of seasonal content, story drops, and more in a way where the rotation starts to feel stale as a result, I wonder just how much players will interact with the feature in the long term. Finally, we had the chance to check out the first ever 10-person raid coming to New World Aeternum, Hive of Gorgons. Described as the hardest content ever in New World, the raid is set amidst breathtaking ruins adorned with statues of Greek gods, architecture that I feel could have been pulled right out of ancient Manoa, and more. The raid itself felt like a true MMO raid, with challenging creature encounters, puzzles, and boss fights that simply couldn't be face-rolled in one go. Hive of Gorgons features multiple bosses, each with some pretty interesting mechanics, such as the echidna's ground AoEs causing pillars of earth to jut into the sky, and the ranged DPS who stood atop one might take some damage for their trouble, but get a damage boost when firing atop one of these pillars down at the enemy. I also like the fact that if you were knocked off a pillar, in order to climb back up one, you had to literally attack it with your mining axe. This actually made me stop and think twice before just pulling out my pickaxe and getting stuck in a mining animation while a giant echidna was rampaging nearby. The raid doesn't just feature interesting boss fights though, but also puzzle encounters that felt like mini bosses all their own. One section saw the group have to splinter off while navigating a labyrinth to stand on multiple buttons throughout the maze to unlock the exit. The only problem is that two Gorgons prowled the maze, and being caught in their gaze spelled instant death. What followed was a delicate dance of coordination, trial, and error, where our tank had to effectively draw the Gorgons away from the rest of the raid group, all while avoiding getting turned into stone himself. While we didn't do too well on our run-through of the Hive of Gorgons, it was a pretty fun experience. This might have been down to the fact that we only had one tank. This also makes me hopeful for a return of some competition with the raid groups of New World. Could we see a race to world first of Hive of Gorgons, and if so, how long will it take? It's exciting to think about. All in all, after almost 4 hours with the endgame content, I came away pretty excited about the future of New World Aeternum, especially for PC players. For players who, rightfully so, have felt spurned since the June announcement, the influx of new endgame content for the most loyal players feels like a step in the right direction for the MMO. What remains to be seen is how this will be supported moving forward. How long will Amazon take to push out new content? What will that content look like? What will the seasonal cadence be? And how much of that content is going to be catered towards the new console players who are kind of getting up to speed? How much of it will be geared towards solo players? And how much of it will be more of this group style content that New World desperately needs at the high level? At the end of the day, I truly do think this is a step in the right direction for New World. Whether or not the player base agrees with me though, will remain to be seen.